Another gem by David Peterson and a hustle play by Juan Soto resulted in a Mets win on Sunday, but this lineup continues to struggle. The good news, they're going to get Francisco Alvarez back to hopefully provide a jolt.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. I've been covering the New York Mets on this show since the 2019 season. It's the only podcast that covers the Mets 7 days a week throughout the regular season. If you want to find some of my written work, you can do so over at justbaseball.com. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. I'll tell you what, it is good to be back here in my Locked On Mets studio. I had a lot of fun on my vacation, certainly, and I hope you guys enjoyed the pre-recorded trade deadline shows to get you ready for what's in store in a couple weeks, and of course the audio-only shows I did over the weekend. But it's nice to be back here with my mic, talking into the camera. It feels good to be home. So let's get into what was a good game on Sunday. Nice to talk about a Mets win. And David Peterson deserves all the credit because if there's one thing that the Mets can count on right now at their starting rotation, it's David Peterson. Now you hope that Kodai Senga, Sean Manaea, these guys, as they get more acclimated and stretched out, they can be other consistent forces. Frankie Montas can maybe be another guy. Clay Holmes, he can maybe pitch a little bit deeper into games. But lately, it's just been David Peterson. I think it was Will Salmon who tweeted this out of The Athletic. Over the last 35 games, the Mets have only had one starting pitcher complete 6 innings. And that's David Peterson. He's done it 5 or 6 times. So he's the one guy you can count on. And he delivered an all-star performance on Sunday, going toe-to-toe with another all-star in Andrew Abbott. And for Peterson, it was shaky early. A couple of rallies by the Reds that could have resulted in a lot more. In the first inning, Luis Acuna make an error, but honestly, that to me was a Mark Vientos error. Pete Alonso was dealing with a thumb injury. He was good enough to take it at bat later in the game, so it doesn't seem like it's going to be something that keeps Pete out, because the one thing you can count on with Pete Alonso, he's going to play through things and he's going to get in the lineup. Same thing with Francisco Lindor. Now you have to watch those guys though, because their play can be a bit compromised when they're playing through something, and we'll talk about that a bit in the next segment when it comes to Lindor and just where this lineup's at currently. But Mark Vientos over at first base, it was a brutal watch. And it's not a knock on Vientos. He doesn't have a lot of experience, but it's just funny because in the offseason, so many Mets fans were ready to send Pete Alonso away. They didn't care anymore. The whole thing about, hey, he's a free agent. He's not a good defender. Let him go. He's not worth the money. I think that was a loud minority. I think a majority of Mets fans wanted Pete Alonso to stay. But it's just interesting when you knock a guy for his defense at first base, because the defensive metrics tell you that he's not a good defender. And then you watch a guy that doesn't have the experience. The fact that Pete Alonso has played over 900 games in the big leagues at first base, he is really solid over there. His work around the bag, he makes the other infielders better because he's good at receiving at first base. He might not be the best with his arm. He might not have the most range. But you know what I want out of my first baseman? I want him to catch the baseball. And Mark Vientos did not do that in the first play of the game. So David Peterson, in an immediate hole, gives up 2 base hits. That scores a run. Luckily, he buckled down, got a ground ball when he needed to. Brett Baty turns the double play with Luis Acuna, and then Peterson gets a soft liner to get out of that first inning jam. He then pitched himself into another one in the second inning after getting the first 2 outs. He gives up a base hit, walks a batter, then hits a batter. So it's bases loaded, 2 outs. Chance for the Reds to break the game open, and Peterson gets a big strikeout to get through that jam unscathed. And that was it, basically. Over the next 4 innings, he retired the side in order each time, gave up just one more hit, and immediately erased that hit with a double play ball. All told, Peterson goes 6 innings, allows 4 hits, 1 walk, 1 unearned run, 4 strikeouts, lowers his ERA in the season to 2.90. The problem for the Mets was Andrew Abbott was nearly as good. The Mets were able to manufacture a run in the 3rd inning. Tyrone Taylor hits a squibber, gets lucky, able to get on base with an infield single. Luis Acuna bunts him over to advance him. And then Brandon Nimmo finds a hole in the infield between the first baseman and the second baseman. Doesn't even take a full swing, just able to reach out, hit a ground ball through to drive in Taylor from second base. And the Mets had their first run to tie the game. In the fifth inning, they grabbed a lead. Brett Baty with a leadoff single. And we're seeing him get a little more frisky on the bases. He stole second base, and that was ahead of Luis Angel Acuna, who was able to get a fly ball over the left fielder Connor Joe's head for a double, which scored Baty, and the Mets took a 2-1 lead. I will say Baty, we'll talk about him more in the next segment. He has played some really good baseball lately. I love the at-bats. The defense has been great all year, and now you're seeing the base running too, becoming a more complete player by the day. Is he ever going to be a David Wright at third base? Yeah, probably not, but few are. Can he be an all-star? I don't really think so, but can he be a solid everyday player at the third base position for the Mets, or at least a strong side of a third base platoon? I think so. So that is one good thing I think you could take from this weekend. Baty had himself a very good series. Now, through 7 innings, all the Mets scored was those 2 runs. Huascar Brazoban pitched a scoreless 7th. In the 8th inning, Reed Garrett got the first 2 outs, but then he issued a walk in front of Elly De La Cruz. And Carlos Mendoza, with arrested Edwin Diaz, decided to get Diaz out there for a 4-out save. Problem, he issues a walk to Elly De La Cruz. He gives up a single to load the bases. And then on the first pitch to Spencer Steer, hits him in the elbow guard to force in a run. That was the inherited run. Now with his 3 guys on the bases, Diaz buckled down, gets a big strikeout to strand them all and keep the Mets tied with a chance to still win it late. And they were able to get that run right back. Juan Soto draws a leadoff walk. The Mets are pretty fortunate because not a great at-bat from the umpire. There are some pitches that were on the borderline that honestly should have been called strikes. But you know what? Juan Soto gets the benefit of the doubt. We've seen the other side of that coin a bunch this year as well. So you're not going to complain about it. And with Soto on first, Pete Alonso strikes out, but Jeff McNeil comes through with a big double to set the stage for Luis Torrens. 2 runners in scoring position, 1 out. Torrens has a long at-bat, hard fought, fouls a couple pitches off to hang in there, and then is able to put something in play, a ground ball to the second baseman, Matt McClain, who does make a really good play home on it. Turns around, quick draw to the plate, but Juan Soto was going on contact. The contact play was on, and he got a great jump, perfect dive into the plate, able to beat the throw. And that's the difference in the game. And I think it was a fitting way to get your 1 victory for David Wright weekend. Obviously, it's unfortunate the New York Mets could not win the series with, honoring Wright. But in some ways, it kind of did honor, it did honor David Wright's legacy because unfortunately, the Mets didn't do a lot of winning with David Wright. And that play that Juan Soto scored on, that's a David Wright doing things within the margins play where he would help lift his team in a moment like that, where he would run the bases well, just do the baseball IQ play that gets you over the top. And luckily, that run was all the Mets needed. Ryan Stanek was able to hold on to the lead in the 9th inning, which easier said than done for Stanek. Going into that appearance, he was 1 for 5 in save opportunities, but he nailed it down, and the Mets were able to win the game, and that ultimately salvages the entire weekend because the Phillies lost to the Angels over the weekend, and that keeps these 2 teams even in the win column. The Mets are still half a game back due to having lost 1 more game than the Phillies, but you'll take it. The division's still right there. Even when they lose 2 games in a row and it feels like everything's falling apart, it's not. So this team just has to figure out a way to stabilize their rotation and get a little more offense, and they got a big bat hopefully coming back into the fold here. Francisco Alvarez is getting called back up after a great run through Syracuse. Can he maintain that power, though, when he's no longer facing AAA pitching? I want to talk about that a little bit here in the next segment. Today's episode is brought to you by Supply House. Get the supplies you need from the site that's made for skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you're going to find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use the promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 14,000 subscribers. We're getting so close. We're within 200, so I really do appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. Now, the New York Mets are finally recalling Francisco Alvarez. And about time. I thought they should have had Alvarez on the roster out of the break. I guess they needed to see 3 more games and 3 more home runs in Syracuse to say, all right, we'll call him up. Across 14 games played in July, Francisco Alvarez got 51 at-bats in AAA. He hit .333, .433 on base, .902 slug. Let me say that again. .902 slugging percentage. That's what happens when you homer 9 times in 51 at-bats. And when he hit that last home run, he had homered 7 times in a 19 at-bat span. Pretty good, okay? Now, granted, if you watch the highlights, it feels like every home run he hit, the ball was right down the middle, whether it was a hanging breaking ball that was put on a tee or a fastball. But you know what? You still got to hit him out. And I talked about this over the weekend. There's a certain level of confidence that you get from playing some lesser competition and getting that swing back. All of a sudden, when you've just hit 7 home runs in a 19 at-bat span, the fence doesn't look so far away. When you're struggling in the big leagues game after game after game, all of a sudden that fence feels 500 feet away, 600 feet away. Now it feels like it's a lot closer. You know, it's like, I don't know if when I was in, coach pitch and they had, they had like the orange fence they just stuck into the ground where it just feels like anyone could homer. That's the type of feeling that Alvarez has right now. I remember there was a year in travel where we're still playing on the fields that had like 200 to 250 foot fences before they move you up. And that's where everyone's going yard. It feels like Alvarez, when you're on a groove like this, he is looking at the ballpark and he's thinking, all right, I can leave the yard at any time. And hopefully he carries that over so he might not get as many mistakes, but you're still going to get mistakes. And if you're commanding your at-bats, you're getting yourself into hitters' counts. If they're trying to locate a fastball to stay in an account, all of a sudden that fastball bleeds middle, you're on time and you have the confidence to drive the baseball. So hopefully this can carry over. Francisco Alvarez hit 11 home runs in his last 16 games played before this promotion back up. So we'll see. We'll see if that power carries over. Luis Torrens did have a good series. He went 5 for 11, drove in a couple of runs. And if you look at his baseball savant page, he's hitting the ball hard. He looks like a guy that could be a real offensive contributor, and yet he hasn't done much of anything this year offensively. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. Sure. Has he been a little bit unlucky? I guess. I don't feel like when I'm watching him, I'm seeing an unlucky hitter, but that's just me. On the season, he's got a 606 OPS. He's got 2 home runs. And across his career, he's got 24 home runs and over 1,000 at-bats. So, Francisco Alvarez is just a more dangerous hitter. I don't think if Luis Torrens went down to Syracuse for 16 games, he hit 11 home runs. I just don't think so. And perfect example of that, when the Mets traded for Torrens, he was tearing the cover off the ball for the Yankees AAA affiliate. Well, tearing the cover off the ball was an 807 OPS with 5 home runs in 30 games. Good, especially for the defender that Torrens is. But Luis Torrens is a backup catcher. He just is. Francisco Alvarez still has so much promise. He's 23 years old, and I was joking about this on Twitter, but Aram Layton for Just Baseball, great prospect analyst, he was tweeting out something about Spencer Jones, who had hit, I don't know, however many home runs in a certain span. But I was joking, well, what about the Mets prospect, Francisco Alvarez, who homered 7 times in 19 at-bats? And I was joking, but at the same time, I mentioned on the tweet, well, Francisco Alvarez is younger than the Yankees' top prospect, Spencer Jones. And he's younger than a lot of guys. He's only 23. So, yes, he's had a lot of big league exposure. It hasn't always gone well. But to give up on Alvarez now is just crazy. And that's why the Mets sent him down to get his confidence back, because this still can be a plus bat from the catcher position. And it's by far the Mets' best chance to have a plus bat at the catcher position this year. It's not going to come from Torrens. It's certainly not going to come from Hayden Sanger. And it's not going to come on the trade market. So hopefully this is a big boost to the lineup, and particularly against left-handed pitching, because the Mets need to figure something out against lefties. That is one of their kryptonites right now. So maybe Alvarez can hit some lefties now that he's back. When it comes to this lineup, if you're looking at the holes, the top four is locked in. And I'm glad Carlos Mendoza said he is not going to play around with Brandon Nimmo anymore. Nimmo is the leadoff man. They're keeping Lindor in the 2-hole with Soto behind him. So you don't have to worry about Lindor batting leadoff and Marte or Vientos batting second, because then you're removing the protection from Francisco Lindor. And Lindor needs that protection from Juan Soto right now because he's struggling. Last 30 games played, he's hitting 189, 248 on base, 361 slug. So that's one thing that has to change for this lineup, is Lindor needs to start swinging the bat better. That's just a reality. He's got to. Not saying that I'm doubting Lindor or I'm giving up on Lindor and this is all Lindor's fault, but you have to call it as you see it. And lately, he's not getting the job done. And he would tell you that himself. He has told you that himself. So that's one big component missing. But once Lindor starts clicking, Nimmo is giving you great at-bats from the leadoff spot. It's kind of like he's did that for a long time. Just a very experienced leadoff hitter, seen a lot of pitches early in games, helping the three guys behind him. And you know what Soto and Alonso are capable of. So the top four, you're not worried about. It's about the bottom five after that. Who can you find to complete this lineup? And it does seem to me like Mark Vientos is finding it and finding it at the right time. I have complete faith that Vientos can have a huge second half. And I would love it if they just abandoned any idea of Starling Marte or Jesse Winker being a DH platoon. And they just said, you know what, Mark, you're the DH every day. Don't even just throw your glove out. Now, they're not going to do that. And I know that when Marte comes back, and that should still come soon, they'll likely have Marte DH against lefties and have Mark Vientos start the games at third base. Never finish a game probably, but start the games at third base with Baty on the bench. And that's fine, because you know what? Brett Baty hasn't got a ton of exposure against left-handed pitching. Hasn't necessarily done well, but honestly, I still think there's a world where Baty is your everyday third baseman this season or in the future. For now, though, fine if they want to do the thing where Marte is going to DH against lefties and Vientos plays third base. But I think Vientos is right now on the verge of getting back to being the guy we saw last year, or at least 80% of that. And that's a huge lift to this lineup. I think against right-handed pitching, Brett Baty is going to continue to do his thing. I think he's earned a starting role in this team. I really do. You know, he's playing great defense. Now we're seeing him add some base running, some stolen base ability to his game. I love Baty in the lineup. And we saw Acuna get a big hit against a lefty. If that can be Acuna's role, if Acuna can find a way to be a short side of the platoon player who's also your defensive replacement and your speedster off the bench, he's got a little bit more function on this roster. And that does give you a possible platoon partner with Baty where Vientos can just be the DH. And I know that there's still a lot of time to talk about the deadline. And so I don't want to spend too much time on it again and rehash all the stuff I talked about in those shows last week. But I'll tell you what, the more I'm thinking about this team, the more that I am envisioning where this team has to go. I think their best bet is to go out and find a center fielder, because Eugenio Suarez, while he would be great in the infield and give you a third baseman and a huge bat you can plug in, Suarez is becoming the belle of the ball at this deadline. Every team wants Eugenio Suarez. Every single team seemingly needs a third baseman. And who wouldn't need a bat that's at 30 home runs already? So with Suarez, the price is getting to a point, and the competition for his services is getting to a point where I don't know if it makes sense for the Mets to go all in on Suarez when they have Vientos, when they have Baty, who's going to give you much better defense at third base than Suarez anyway. I think they need to find their bat in another place. And I also think that if you can bring Jeff McNeil into second base, your infield is secure. So then it's just about finding your center fielder. And I got to tell you, I'm shocked to actually be saying this, because we have one of our guys over at Just Baseball, Elijah Evans, who also does some stuff for Future Sox. He's been a White Sox fan, and he's really plugged into their system. And me and him have been going back and forth for a lot of this year about a Luis Robert trade to the Mets. And I was really critical of it because I was looking at the overall numbers for Luis Robert. He's been bad this year. So my take originally was, why would the Mets give up anything of value for Luis Robert? If you want to dump the salary on the Mets, by all means, worthy of a flyer, but why would the Mets trade anything for him? I am coming around to this for 3 reasons. The first one, the Mets need to figure out their lineup for left-handed pitching, and Luis Robert rakes against lefties. So at least you have that to fall back on. So far this year, he's hitting .299 with a .427 on base and a .552 slugging percentage against lefties. He's got a .979 OPS. He's hit 10 home runs this season. 5 of them have come against left-handed pitching. So at least you have that. If nothing else, instead of Tyrone Taylor, who's not really hitting against anybody, yes, you look at the numbers on the season for Luis Robert, and you see he hasn't had a good year because he has been absolutely abysmal against right-handed pitching. But against lefties, he rakes. So he gives you something, as well as the other reason to get him, the floor of speed and defense. We're 3 outs above average in center field. He has stolen 25 bases this year, is getting on base at a .289 clip. So the toughest thing to do is still first for Luis Robert. But once he does get on, he does give you a real threat to score. So if you're talking about a guy that might bat 9th for you, give you speed, give you defense, and then he's going to rake against lefties. Well, now I'm already starting to come around to it. But here's the third most important reason why I think Luis Robert might be the fit for the New York Mets. And that's the fact that it seems like these White Sox hitters just need to leave the White Sox, and then they start to thrive, because Gavin Sheets has had a great year with the Padres. I mean, I guess maybe great is an overstatement, but considering the expectations and the contract that he's on right now, which was just basically, I don't even know the exact number, but I think it was pretty much nothing. He's making $1.6 million. Over the last 3 years, Gavin Sheets for the White Sox had a .659 OPS. This year, 94 games played, he has a .761 OPS. So that's a 100-point jump in OPS. And he's 1 home run away from tying his career high of 15. So Gavin Sheets probably ends up with 20 home runs this year and giving you a OPS above 750 after being awful for the White Sox for the last 3 years, a negative WAR player every single year. That's a big improvement with a change of scenery. And now you're seeing with Andrew Vaughn, who was a number 3 overall pick back in 2019, was awful with the White Sox. This year, he had a .531 OPS in 48 games played. They sent him down to the minor leagues. Aaron Savali ended up on the trade market. They decided, you know what? We'll take a flyer on Savali. Hopefully he can rebuild his value with us, and we can flip him again at the deadline and get something of return, some type of a prospect. So they decided to make the change. They send Vaughn to the Brewers. And now all of a sudden the Brewers can't lose since they have called up Andrew Vaughn. I believe it's 9 games since he's been up. They're 9-0. He's played in 8 of those games. Andrew Vaughn's hitting .391, 500 on base, .739 slug, 2 home runs, 2 doubles, 12 RBIs in those 8 games that he's played. Now, who knows if that's sustainable for Andrew Vaughn? But the fact that 2 of these former White Sox have gone to other teams and suddenly they found success, and Luis Robert reached much higher heights than either of those guys ever did, was a legitimate superstar a couple years ago, a 5-tool superstar. I think he's the guy to take a flyer on. I really do. Because if nothing else, you try him out. If it doesn't work and he just hits lefties, well, now he is a much better platoon partner for Jeff McNeil, and you go back to McNeil in center field, knowing that he can do it, but you also don't have to run McNeil to the ground. You can have Jeff McNeil be your second baseman. You can park Ronnie Mauricio into Syracuse and let him hit there for a while. You keep Acuna on the roster doing the bench utility man thing. You got Baty and Vientos you're giving a bunch of playing time to. To me, it makes sense. And you also still have an outside chance of calling up Jet Williams if you're just desperate and you want to put Jet in center or at second base. So the Mets have some options. To me, that might make the most sense, and I wanted to spend some time on it because my mind has been changed, and it's been changed by Andrew Vaughn turning into a legitimate player after being awful and seeing Gavin Sheets do it all year. Maybe the White Sox are just the problem. And I don't think Chris Getz can say that at the deadline. Oh, we just suck. Like, it's not Chris Getz is going to go out there and say, yeah, we want more for Luis Robert because he's going to be better for you guys because we just don't know what we're doing. He's not going to say that. He's going to have to trade the guy based on what he has done and based on the market. And when you attach the contract to Luis Robert, I don't think there's going to be a crazy market for him. So I think the Mets can get away with a 1-for-1 trade for a rental, and I don't think it's going to be a Javi Baez situation with PCA. I don't think you have to give a prospect that can burn you in that way, a first-round talent. I think you could probably get away with giving up a Nick Morabito, for example, for Luis Robert, or maybe it is Drew Gilbert. And yes, Drew Gilbert he was either a first-round pick or a comp pick, but I don't think Drew Gilbert's going to turn into PCA. I really don't. I think that would be like the highest you'd have to go to potentially trade for Luis Robert. I don't think it's going to cost you an arm and a leg unless a crazy market develops, and he has swung the bat well coming out of the break, Luis Robert, and in July. Limited sample size. I think he's hitting like 375 in July. I don't know how much teams are going to buy into it. There's such a lack of bats on this market. You really never know, but I thought it was worth mentioning on the show today that I am coming around more and more to the idea of Luis Robert because he raced against lefties. That's something the Mets need. He's a change of scenery candidate, and there's just not a lot out there on the market. And I think making the move in center field makes the most sense for the Mets because it allows Jeff McNeil to come in. And you now know that if whoever you take a flyer on, if they don't pan out, okay, you can still shift Jeff McNeil back out there come playoff time to be your regular against right-handed pitching. And again, if Robert can be the other half of that platoon, it might not be the worst thing in the world. So that's where I'm at with the trade deadline right now. That's the latest I have on it. But I want to talk about this series over the weekend, Mets versus Angels, and also the Phillies made a move that's going to frustrate Mets fans. So we'll get to all of that here in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing. Whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You've already followed the action, but why not make it even a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether I'm using FanDuel to place the same game parlay or watching a bet right into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet $5. You get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. If you're an everydayer that always tunes into the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime, take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways, or get a live graphic sent to your phone each day so you know who's in the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, the Phillies made a move that is going to frustrate Mets fans, and that's the fact that David Robertson has signed with the Phillies. Yes, a move that could have been made with only cash, and the Mets did not get the job done, but it cost a lot of money. And for Robertson, maybe he prefers going back to the team that he pitched in the World Series with a couple of years ago, the team that traded him at the deadline. Maybe that's where he would rather return. He also, again, making a lot of money, got to sit out for the first couple months of the season, enjoy time with the family, and now he goes back to work with the deadline looming for the stretch run of the season, get to pitch in important games on a good team that has a chance to win it all. He's going to make $5.5 million. Now, that is the prorated salary. The contract that he's signing is a 1-year, $16 million deal. Obviously, the way that contracts work, it is a full year deal, but you only get paid prorated for how long you're on the team. So again, for Robertson's purposes, he's going to make $5.5 million. Phillies are going to pay about $12 million for him because they are well into the luxury tax. This is a very all-in move for the Phillies. We're just talking about it from a financial perspective, and I'm sure it's not the last thing they do, but I think for them, this gives them more prospect capital to go out and make other moves, whether they want to be in the market for a Luis Robert or if they want to shoot higher for Jarren Duran, if they want to get an outfielder, and I don't even know if Jarren Duran's going to be on the table, but whatever, it ends up being, if they want to pick up Eugenio Suarez and relegate Bohm, I don't know if they would necessarily do that, but the point is the Phillies have more prospect capital, and they plug in a guy to the back end of their bullpen that very well can end up being their closer when it's all said and done. So that's the move that's going to frustrate Mets fans, but it does not mean that this team is going to lose out on this division because of David Robertson. They just got to make some other moves at the deadline to get a top bullpen arm into the mix. Now we'll talk about the upcoming series, Mets versus Angels. The Mets will complete this homestand. And the Angels are coming off doing the Mets a favor, beating the Phillies over the weekend. If you look at what they've done, really since the month of May, they've been a pretty good baseball team. They started out the year 12-17. They were 500 in May. And since then, they're 23-19. So they've been playing some pretty good ball overall here. You look at what they do well, they got a good lineup, like a legitimately good lineup. They are fourth in Major League Baseball in home runs. They're middle of the pack in runs scored and OPS. But over the last 30 days, they are the best team in baseball in OPS. They're fifth in runs scored, fourth in home runs. So this team actually rakes. They got Joe Odell, who over the last 30 days has an 872 OPS. Zach Neto's OPS, 953. Mike Trout, 920. Taylor Ward, 975. Jorge Soler, 946. Travis d'Arnaud, 990. So this team has been absolutely raking lately. Their pitching, though, not great. So if you want to beat the Angels, you got to score runs. Not necessarily the recipe the Mets are accustomed to winning by lately, but you never know. Maybe the Mets pitching staff can actually hold this lineup at bay, but they really got to score against this Angels team that on the season, they're 26th in ERA. Their bullpen has been particularly bad, 5.12 ERA in the season. You're going up against Tyler Anderson and Kyle Hendricks with a TBD right now and the third starter in this series. I mean, the Mets should be able to win this series just on paper. But again, the Angels were able to go into Philly and win a series this weekend, so you definitely can't discount them. Again, game one, Tyler Anderson for the Angels going up against Kodai Senga. Anderson has a 4.34 ERA in the year, but a 5.20 ERA over his last 7 starts. Senga working on a 1.39 ERA this season. So the Mets have a huge edge there, but you also don't know how many pitches Kodai Senga has to offer here. He probably threw some bullpens in between starts. I don't think he would have expanded his pitch count. What did he throw last time out? Memory serves, it was it 70 in that range? Or am I shortchanging him? I feel like I kind of feel like it was right around 70, if not just shy of that. Let me look it up real quick here. That game against the Royals. Yeah, it was 67 pitches. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was still limited to about 75. If that's the case, you're going to have to rely on your bullpen to cover up some of these innings, unless Senga is just really economical. But we'll see. We'll see where Senga's at. Game 2 is going to be Kyle Hendricks, who's got a 4.88 ERA in the season, versus Frankie Montas, who's got an ERA over 5, but that doesn't tell the full story. He's still just getting his legs under him. His last start was pretty good, so I'm very curious to see where Montas is at, and I think he is probably going to be the most stretched out starting pitcher you have in this upcoming series. Game 3 will be Sean Manaea versus TBD. So we don't know who's going to start for the Angels, like I mentioned before. Manaea also probably on some degree of a pitch count. So it might require the Mets bullpen to eat up some innings here. Be curious how they go about it, but this is a team that you still should beat when you just look at the pitching they're going to put out there and the fact that you should have 3 quality arms. And I think a real thing the Mets have to figure out here over the next 2 weeks is how much optimism should they have for internal growth with this rotation? Because you really could go into this deadline and say, all right, the rotation's good. You got Senga, Manaea, Peterson, Holmes, and Montas. That's what you wanted. And you have Paul Blackburn, as a guy that could potentially help you. You have Tyler McGill, who might make a return this season still. And you have Brandon Sproat on an absolute heater in AAA. Had another great start. It's 4 good starts in a row where he hasn't allowed an earned run. And he's all of a sudden looking like the guy that went into this season as the clear-cut top pitching prospect in the Mets system. You could call him up at some point. You can call up Nolan McLean. So there is internal options. It's crazy. Now you look at Sproat's numbers, 4.34 ERA on the season. in 19 starts. And I mean, he's probably shaved 2 full runs off that easily. Let's look. He was rocking a 5.95 ERA. And so, yeah, he's cut that by 1.6 runs. And that's a 6-inning performance where he struck out 6, 5 innings, 8 strikeouts, 7 innings of shutout ball, 4 strikeouts in his most recent start, 5 innings, but only 1 hit allowed, an unearned run, walked a batter, struck out 9. So all of a sudden, Brandon Sproat looks like a guy that is knocking on the door, and Nolan McLean has been knocking on the door all year. So we'll see. But I think the Mets have to be a little more sure that they're going to get at least 2 playoff starting pitchers out of the trio of Montas, Senga, and Minaya. And the 3 of them are starting in this series. If they can believe that 2 of those 3 guys are going to be able to start a playoff game, they got David Peterson, and then it's just figuring out one more spot, whether that be Holmes, whether that be all of those guys are able to start playoff games, whether that be McGill coming back, or whether that be the prospects. Maybe you don't have to go out and trade for a starting pitcher. Maybe you go all in on the bullpen. But again, that's deadline stuff, and we will have plenty of time to talk about it over the next couple of weeks. That's what this time of year is all about. It's July 21st, so it's not even a couple weeks. It's 10 days. 10 days until the trade deadline. A lot to discuss. I appreciate all of you for tuning into the show. Make sure if you're watching on YouTube, you hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on the audio side, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, check out Locked On MLB Game at the show that takes you around all of the action in Major League Baseball with insight from our local experts and league-wide experts that are taking you through all the games from the night before. You can find Locked On MLB Game Night on the Locked On MLB YouTube channel as well as the Locked On MLB podcast feed.